Ever heard of the Great Kingdom of Benin? I'm talking about the legendary empire in West Africa, famous for its magnificent bronze sculptures and powerful kings. But what if I told you that before it was even called Benin, it had another name, a name that echoes through the mists of time? It was known as Igodomigodo. Imagine a land ruled by kings said to have descended from the heavens themselves. They were called the Ogisos, which literally means rulers of the sky. For nearly 1,000 years, these divine kings reigned over a powerful, organized, and deeply spiritual people. Their capital, Ugbiku, was the heart of a kingdom that had mastered complex social structures and a sophisticated monarchy long before many other parts of the world. The Ogisos were the connection between the people and the divine, and under their rule, Igodomigodo flourished. But as with all great empires, time began to wear away at its foundations. Over centuries, the divine authority of the Ogisos started to crack. The once unified kingdom was shaken by internal conflicts. Noble families grew ambitious and succession crises became common, leading to instability and rebellion. The throne, once a symbol of unshakable power, now seemed vulnerable. The final straw came with the reign of the last Ogiso, a king named Odo. His rule was marked by poor decisions and unpopular policies, which led to widespread discontent among his people. Eventually, he was banished, exiled from the very kingdom he was meant to rule. With the departure of Ogiso Odo, Igodomigodo was plunged into chaos. A dangerous power vacuum emerged, and the kingdom teetered on the brink of collapse. Without a divine ruler, the people were lost, and the land was lawless. The Council of Elders, desperate to restore order and save their nation, gathered in deep consultation. They remembered an ancient prophecy, a legend that foretold the coming of a new ruler, one who would re-establish the connection to the heavens. The prophecy spoke of a king from a sacred city, a city known for its spiritual power and royal lineage. So, they made a momentous decision. They sent a delegation on a long and perilous journey to the sacred Yoruba city of Ife. They went not as conquerors, but as supplicants, pleading with the king of Ife, the Uni, to send them a true prince, someone worthy of restoring their kingdom's glory. The Uni listened, and he granted their request. He sent his own son, a valiant and powerful prince named Orunmiyan. When Orunmiyan arrived in Igodomigodo, he was a figure of awe and respect. He was noble, strong, and carried the authority of the great city of Ife. However, he found the people of Igodomigodo to be incredibly difficult to govern. After years of chaos, they were quarrelsome and stubborn. Frustrated by the constant infighting, Orunmiyan decided he could not rule such a difficult people. He famously called the land Ali Binu, which means land of vexation, a name that would eventually evolve into Benin. Disheartened, Prince Orunmiyan prepared to leave, but his time in Igodomigodo was not without consequence. Before his departure, he fathered a son with a local princess. He then left the kingdom in the hands of the elders, but with a promise. He declared that his son, born of both Ife royalty and Benin nobility, would be the one to rule. This son was raised among the people of Igodomigodo, learning their customs and their language. When he came of age, he was crowned as Uika I. This event was a monumental turning point in history. Uika I became the first Oba of Benin, a new title that replaced the old Ogiso. His coronation marked the end of the ancient Ogiso dynasty and the dawn of the Oba era. The tumultuous period of chaos was over. A new line of kings, one that would lead Benin to become one of Africa's most powerful and enduring empires, had begun. The foundation was laid, the prophecy was fulfilled, and the making of Great Benin had truly started. So, Uika I takes the throne, and just like that, the kingdom of Igodomigodo is no more. It's now the Benin Kingdom. This wasn't just a name change, it was a total rebranding. The people were all in, dropping the old name and embracing this new identity with serious pride. Uika was a smart ruler. He had this unique position, right? His mother was Bini, and his father was the legendary Orunmiyan from Ife, so he masterfully blended the local customs of his mother's people with the royal traditions from his father. This created a strong, stable foundation for the monarchy. He reorganized the royal court, surrounding himself with loyal chiefs and nobles who helped him govern. The kingdom was solid, but the real fireworks? They were still a few generations away. That's when rulers like Obiuedo and the legendary Oba Ozaliwa stepped onto the scene. These guys weren't just kings. They were warriors and empire builders. They looked at the kingdom and saw something much, much bigger. They started expanding, building up incredibly powerful armies and bringing neighboring tribes into the fold. Oba Ozaliwa, who ruled in the late 15th century, earned the nickname Ozaliwa the Conqueror for a reason. He was relentless, waging wars, forging alliances, and expanding Benin's influence far beyond the borders of modern-day Nigeria. Benin became famous for its fearsome warriors, but it wasn't all about force. They were also shrewd diplomats. It was during Ozaliwa's time that Benin began to interact with the outside world in a major way. Portuguese explorers arrived on the coast, and instead of just seeing them as a threat, the Oba saw an opportunity. They opened up trade routes, exchanging goods like ivory, palm oil, and pepper for European goods and firearms. This trade brought incredible wealth into the kingdom and set the stage for centuries of international relations. The Oba's palace, which had started out relatively simple, was transformed into a breathtaking architectural marvel. Imagine walls adorned with shimmering ivory, intricate coral beadwork, and of course, the now famous Benin bronzes. These bronze plaques and sculptures were more than just art. They were a library, a historical record cast in metal, telling the stories of the kingdom's history, its heroes, and its spiritual beliefs. The level of detail and craftsmanship was so incredible that when Europeans first saw them, they were completely blown away. They couldn't believe such sophisticated art was being created in West Africa. The bronzes became a symbol of Benin's power, wealth, and cultural sophistication. From a collection of scattered tribes under the Ogiso rulers, Benin had transformed. It was now a centralized, powerful empire with a formidable army, a complex political structure, and a culture so rich it left a permanent mark on world history. Benin was a force to be reckoned with, respected and feared all across West Africa. The Golden Age had truly begun. This story of transformation is just incredible, showing how visionary leadership and cultural pride can build an empire. If you ever wondered what a real-life Wakanda looked like, let's travel back to the 16th century, to West Africa, and witness the golden age of the Benin Empire. This wasn't just a kingdom. It was a powerhouse of culture, military might, and political genius, and at its very center was one of its greatest rulers, Oba Ezigi. Ezigi was a visionary. He wasn't just a king. He was a scholar, a strategist, and a diplomat. He understood the world was changing and knew Benin had to change with it. So, he forged powerful trade relationships with Portuguese explorers. This wasn't just about exchanging goods. It was a strategic move. Benin gained access to firearms, transforming its army into one of the most formidable forces in the region. With these new weapons and brilliant tactics, Benin's influence expanded, making its military almost unstoppable. But Ezigi's legacy wasn't just built on conquest. Under his rule, art didn't just exist. It exploded. The royal palace became a vibrant center of creativity, giving birth to some of the most stunning artworks in history, the Benin bronzes. Imagine intricate plaques and sculptures, cast in shimmering brass and carved from precious ivory. These weren't just decorations. They were living history books, telling the epic stories of the Obas, their divine origins, and their legendary battles. Each piece was a chronicle, a testament to the empire's glory, cast in metal for all eternity. The level of detail and craftsmanship was so advanced it baffled European visitors for centuries. And speaking of powerful figures, Ezigi made a revolutionary move that would echo through history. He elevated his mother, Queen Idia, to the newly created position of Yoba or Queen Mother. This wasn't just an honorary title. Idia was a formidable leader in her own right, a brilliant political advisor, a spiritual guide, and even a military commander who led her own troops into battle. Her wisdom and strength were so vital to the empire that her likeness was immortalized in one of the most iconic art pieces from Benin, a beautiful ivory mask that has become a symbol of African heritage and female power worldwide. Now, let's picture the capital, Benin City, during this golden age. When the first Portuguese travelers arrived, they were stunned. They described a city that was vast, meticulously planned, and incredibly clean. Its streets were wide and straight, unlike the narrow, winding alleys of many European cities at the time. The entire city was protected by a massive system of walls and earthworks, a defensive network so huge that it was larger than the Great Wall of China. At the heart of it all was a sophisticated government, an efficient bureaucracy, and a palace that was a city within a city. Benin wasn't just a kingdom. It was a sprawling, organized, and admired empire. This was Benin at its peak, a beacon of African civilization, admired and respected across continents. But as we know, history is always in motion. Greatness often attracts envy, and the world outside of Benin was changing rapidly. The very relationships that helped build the empire would soon introduce new challenges. The Golden Age was brilliant, but shadows were gathering on the horizon. And the story of Benin was far from over. As the Kingdom of Benin reached the very peak of its power and influence, new storms were gathering on the horizon, unseen but powerful. Internally, the empire had grown so vast and complex that it was becoming difficult to manage. Power struggles began to emerge among the powerful palace chiefs. Some, driven by ambition, started to quietly challenge the absolute authority of the Oba. The royal court, once a symbol of unity and strength, slowly became a place of political intrigue, jealousy, and greed. Factions formed, and whispers of conspiracy filled the palace corridors. Despite this internal rot, the institution of the kingship itself held firm. It was an institution rooted in centuries of tradition, ancestral worship, and a sacred authority that most people still deeply respected. The Oba was more than a king. He was the spiritual and physical embodiment of the Benin people. But the real existential threat wasn't coming from within the palace walls. It was coming from across the seas. By the 18th and especially the 19th centuries, European ambitions in Africa were shifting dramatically. The old trading relationships, which were once built on a degree of mutual respect and partnership, began to sour. The British, who had been Benin's primary European trading partners for a long time, dealing in palm oil, ivory, and pepper, were growing impatient. Their industrial economy demanded more resources and more control. They were no longer content with being just trading partners. They wanted to be masters. The British grew increasingly frustrated with the Oba's refusal to cede his kingdom's sovereignty and become a puppet for their colonial interests. They saw Benin's independence not as a right, but as an obstacle to their imperial expansion. In 1888, a new king, Oba Ovenramwan Nogbaisi, came to the throne. He inherited an empire standing at a dangerous crossroads. Ovenramwan was a formidable leader, strong-willed, highly intelligent, and fiercely protective of Benin's independence. He understood the gravity of the situation and the nature of the British threat. As their pressure mounted, he stood his ground. He enacted policies to control trade, asserting his authority and refusing to let foreign interests dictate the affairs of his kingdom. He was determined not to be the Oba who surrendered Benin to a foreign power. The British saw his strength not as admirable, but as defiant. They labeled him a tyrant and a barbarian in their newspapers, creating a justification for what they planned to do next. The breaking point came in 1897. A group of British officials, led by acting Consul General James Phillips, decided to march on Benin City, despite being explicitly warned not to come at that time due to important religious ceremonies. The expedition was a poorly disguised attempt to depose the Oba. On their way to the city, the British party was ambushed by a group of Benin soldiers, and most of the British envoys were killed. The circumstances of this ambush are still debated by historians. Was it a panicked, unauthorized attack by a local chief, or a calculated defensive move ordered by the palace? Regardless of the truth, the British Empire had the pretext it had been waiting for. They labeled the incident the Benin Massacre and immediately declared war. In London, the decision was made to launch a massive punitive expedition. This would be no small skirmish. It was a full-scale invasion. The event would trigger the darkest and most tragic chapter in Benin's long and storied history. It was a chapter that would be marked by overwhelming military force, betrayal, unimaginable destruction, and a final, desperate act of defiance. The great kingdom of Benin, which had stood for centuries, was about to face its ultimate test. Thank you for watching. If you want to learn about the dramatic fall of Benin City and the story of the stolen bronzes, make sure you're subscribed and have notifications turned on for the next part of our series. See you next time.